There's something quietly unsettling about Howl's Moving Castle. We all remember the romance, the wind, the softness, the floating castle. But now coming back to it, I feel something else first. Sophie moves through life like she has already stepped aside. Howl turns himself into beauty, mood, and spectacle. Even the castle keeps moving like stillness would reveal too much. And I think that may be the real emotional engine of the movie. Under all the fantasy, Howl's Moving Castle feels deeply interested in what people do when being fully seen starts to feel dangerous. That's part of why the film lingers. Its disguises barely look like disguises at all. They look like charm, usefulness, personality, like the shapes people learn to live inside. I think Sophie is where that feeling becomes clearest. Her curse changes her body, though the deeper shock comes from how natural it feels. She already carries herself like someone who expects very little for herself. She is careful in that quiet way that almost disappears into the room. She works, she helps, and she recedes. There's a sadness in her from the beginning, and it feels older than she is. So when the curse turns her into an old woman, the transformation lands with this strange emotional honesty. It feels like the film taking a private self-image and making it visible. Sophie has already been living with the energy of someone who has quietly given up her place at the center of her own life. That reading gets clearer when you glance at the novel. Diana Wynne-Jones frames Sophie as the eldest of 3 daughters, with the fairy tale expectation that the eldest is headed toward the least magical fate. The film leaves that exact setup behind, though the emotional residue still seems to linger. Sophie still feels like someone who has absorbed the idea that life opens more fully for other people. Even the way the film handles her voice moves in that same direction. Chico Baisho said Miyazaki wanted Sophie's voice to stay natural and express her inner psyche instead of turning old age into a broad performance. I love that detail, and it fits the emotional logic of the whole film. Sophie's age seems to shift with her inner life. At certain moments, she feels heavier, older, more hidden inside herself. Then something loosens and you can almost hear her becoming more alive from the inside out. That's what makes her so quietly devastating to me. She gives the impression of someone who has grown used to making herself smaller. Maybe so life will ask less of her. Maybe so disappointment will sting a little less. Her curse takes that private habit and places it in full view. And once you start seeing that pattern in Sophie, Howl starts feeling different too. He lives in a completely different texture, though the fear underneath feels strangely related. He surrounds himself with beauty, movement, color, mystery, all the lovely surfaces that make a person hard to pin down. His vanity feels almost too dramatic to read as simple shallowness. It feels closer to emotional management. He stays dazzling, he stays elusive. He keeps life moving at the level of mood and spectacle, and maybe that is part of how he protects whatever feels most fragile in him. And I think that's why Howl lingers in people's minds so strongly. He feels glamorous, ridiculous, magnetic, a little absurd, and somewhere under all of that there is a person who seems terrified of becoming fixed in place. Terrified of being reduced, or being known in a way that could cost him control. So he curates his own atmosphere. He gives people a performance before he gives them access. And by the time Sophie enters the castle, it feels like Howl's way of moving through life has already shaped the whole household. The place runs on improvisation. It runs on mood, or on little performances that keep deeper vulnerabilities slightly out of view. Markle already knows how to read a room and become what the room needs from him. Calcifer turns confinement into attitude, bargaining, noise, a whole personality of flame and bluster that feels funny at first, then a little sad once you sit with it. Even the castle keeps rattling forward as if stillness would ask for too much honesty all at once. I think that's part of what makes the castle feel so alive. It carries soot, clutter, friction, domestic irritation, all the messier textures of life, so it never drifts into some polished fantasy dream. It feels assembled, patched together, emotionally lived in. Diana Wynne-Jones once said that the grimy bathroom in Howl's Moving Castle came from a real bathroom she lived with for years, which somehow feels perfect. The magic in this story lives right beside inconvenience and chaos. That detail makes the whole place feel more human. Maybe that's why the castle feels warm. Maybe that's also why it feels fragile. It gives you the sense of a shelter made by people who have learned to survive through deflection, performance, and movement. And that's where the movie starts opening into something larger. The castle feels like shelter, which quietly raises a harder question. What kind of world would make a place like this feel so necessary? Once that question enters the film, everything around the household starts to press inward. The sky grows heavier. The cities feel more vulnerable. The machinery of war moves closer and closer to private life until the whole atmosphere starts feeling charged with distortion. I think this is where Howl's Moving Castle becomes sadder in a deeper way. These people are trying to hold on to some fragile inner self while the world around them keeps turning life into allegiance, machinery, and smoke. Transformation starts feeling less whimsical and more coercive. Beauty starts feeling like armor, and distance starts feeling like a survival habit. This is where Miyazaki's own words sharpen the reading. He said the film was profoundly affected by the Iraq War, and that makes emotional sense almost immediately. The movie feels full of people trying to preserve some private softness while the outside world keeps converting life into power, destruction, and role. Violence enters daily life long before it reaches the body. It enters through atmosphere, through tension, or the feeling that your inner life has to keep disguising itself just to stay intact. And once the world of the film starts looking like that, Suleiman lands very differently. She stops feeling like a clever obstacle in the plot and starts feeling like one of the movie's clearest expressions of power without tenderness. She sees through people with eerie ease. She understands instability, weakness, fear, all the small fractures inside a person, then folds that understanding into control. That's what makes her unsettling. Her insight carries very little softness. She reads people in order to manage them. In a film full of hidden selves, Solomon feels like the terrifying possibility of being fully seen by someone who has no interest in mercy. And I think that is why her presence changes the emotional temperature so quickly. Suddenly, the fear of exposure feels sharper, more structural. Being known in this world can place you inside someone else's design. Then the Witch of the Waste takes the same pressure and turns it into something messier, sadder, and maybe more painful to watch. Her longing has no graceful container. It swells, it reaches, it embarrasses itself, and it becomes almost humiliating in its visibility. And that makes her strangely important to this film. She feels like one of its rawest images of what happens when desire loses dignity inside a harsh world. Sophie recedes, Howl dazzles, Solomon governs. The witch hungers in full view of everyone. There's something almost unbearable in that. She turns into a picture of need that has lost any safe place to go. I think that may be part of why she lingers in my mind. Under the exaggeration, under the grotesque comedy of her presence, there is a real human ache there. She feels like the version of vulnerability the rest of the film is trying very hard to avoid becoming. So by this point, the movie has built a whole emotional landscape out of disguise, pressure, distortion, and the fear of exposure, which is part of why the tenderness in this film lands so deeply. By then, you can feel how much fear it has already passed through. The warmth that begins to grow between Sophie and Howl feels moving in a very particular way. It doesn't arrive like a grand cure. It feels smaller than that and maybe more human. It feels like permission. Permission to let the performance loosen a little. Permission to exist with less armor between the self and the world. Sophie starts taking up more emotional space. Howl starts living with slightly less distance between his inner life and the people around him. Even the castle begins to feel warmer, more habitable, more mutual, like the air inside it has changed. And I feel like that might be the real ache of Howl's moving castle. Under all the magic, it seems deeply aware of how easily people drift into versions of themselves that feel safer, prettier, quieter, more manageable, more untouchable. Then very gently, it imagines what it might feel like to live a little closer to the surface of your own heart. Sophie and Howl never feel perfectly resolved to me. What they find feels smaller and more human than that. A little less fear, a little more room, a little more honesty. And for a movie this full of movement, that tiny sense of inner stillness may be the most beautiful transformation in it.